Oh, hello there, and welcome to Phil Talking D20. So, apologies again for the lengthy delay between videos. Um, Started a new job. That's been a little bit more time consuming than I'd anticipated, even though technically it's not as time consuming as previous jobs, so that makes no sense. But just bear with me. Change of industry, change of life balance, and finding my feet. So, yeah, sorry about the lengthy delay, but gonna try, and I've said this before, to get some more videos out, and obviously this is one of them. So, what are we talking about today? Well, chaos theory. Oh, edgy. It's not actually that edgy. It's really a bit of a look behind the screen at, I suppose, little tricks that I use when I'm GMing to try and catch myself off guard as a GM. And I suppose to a degree, this is more applicable to homebrew than perhaps it is to an adventure path, because an adventure path has a start, a middle, and an end, and is very kind of well laid out and structured in what is going to happen, when, and why. So I don't use APs. I always homebrew, just because it gives me more creative control over story type, event pacing, and more importantly, encounter balance. Often that really comes down to, I suppose, me having played adventure paths and kind of those shorter kind of adventure kind of pre-written stories that might only be a couple of sessions long. I've often found them to be a bit out of whack when it comes to balance. One good example of that is a particular story arc where we were like level 12 and the final encounter was a Baylor with levels, and the AP was fairly satisfied that a level kind of 11 to like 12 party could face a Baylor with levels, which was absurd. And in the AP it stated the default initial maneuver of said Baylor was to summon another Baylor, and needless to say, TPK rapidly ensued. Silly. So because of bad experiences, I've never gone back to them and don't regret it at all. So, chaos theory. It's really not that complicated, which is why it's quite a useful tip, because things being complicated bog things down and get you stuck in ruts and make gaming more awkward and less fun. So, the nuts and bolts of it is as follows. When you get to an impasse as a GM, where you as the GM are the sole arbiter of a decision, roll a dice to see what the outcome might be. A good example of this is in my recent campaign, we had a situation where they were trying to draw a NPC into a combat, and they were trying to bait him. And typically, you would simply make a decision of, is he going to be baited into getting into a fight, yes or no? But there are the obvious, I suppose, connotations when you're a GM and you're arbitrating decisions, that you just choosing to make that decision and you having a very solid idea on what direction your story is taking and just marching down that path, like regardless of what's going on, gets very, very kind of close to, I suppose, an element of railroading that obviously you definitely see in adventure paths, because they want you to progress from the start to the middle to the end, because they have a story that they have decided, and you have decided to take part in that story and you're running through it. Whereas when you're doing homebrew and those kind of, I suppose less regimented kind of home style games, collective storytelling is probably a little bit more interesting. And if you as the GM just simply make all your arbitrary decisions yourself, there is an element of your own bias that will inevitably creep into the game. because the buck stops with you as the GM to go yes or no at various given points, or maybe, or yes and, or no but, or whatever connotation of phrases you use at those particular moments. So it doesn't work every time, and you shouldn't do it for every decision, but sometimes for big decisions and small decisions, it can be fun to mix things up even for you as the GM. So going back to that example, nice and straightforward, needed to bait that NPC into combat, wanted to challenge them to a duel, to try and assassinate them and off them, but kind of do it in a way that appeared kind of based on like duels and fights to the death as personal duels being an accepted part of the world. They wanted to try and engineer it so that it looked above board and would be kind of done legitimately without too much fallout from a, I suppose, if you like, a legal sense, quote unquote. I didn't want to just arbitrate whether it was a yes or a no, because they obviously have some impact on the direction of the story. So I rolled a dice and I just went 50-50, high, yes, low, no. It wasn't my decision. It was the dice's decision. And just like the players, I had to figure out the consequences of that dice roll. Another good example of that is a scenario where the characters took a ship and went on a small coastal sea voyage to essentially shorten a journey. And it was spring. You could encounter storms and bad weather. And rather than just going, oh, you hit a terrible storm and it's awful and your ship sinks, or going, everything's fine and you get there and everything's rosy and it's super easy, I simply, again, arbitrated the dance, the kind of the dice chance roll, but I passed it on to a player. And I said, okay, so you're taking this voyage. Who wants to roll to see how well the voyage goes? And you don't need a specific dice, a D6 or a D20, anything that's going to give you a 50-50 result or whatever kind of balance point you want to go for a given event. 50-50 is just easy though, isn't it? Let's be honest. You can just simply go, all right, roll me a D6. High, the weather's good. Low, the weather's bad. And eventually one of the players said, you know what, I'll do it. I'll roll the dice. And then what you have there is you have an element of including the party and bringing them in to the, I suppose, shared responsibility of, quote unquote, a GM role going well, a GM decision going well or badly for the party's kind of outcome. Now, this particular player rolled low, and so they hit bad weather. But then the next question arises from the bad weather. Are you seasick? And again, it's not a case of, no, my character's not seasick, or yes, my character is definitely seasick, because no one's going to choose, yes, my character's seasick. But also, as the GM, is it fair for you to arbitrate that decision and go, all your characters are seasick, ha ha ha, all your characters throw up a lot? Again, threw it back to the dice roll, give it a roll, let me know what you get. D6. One player rolled a 1, having chosen low for being ill. They were very seasick. What does this mean? Not a great deal. But what it's doing is it's just adding those little extra layers of story to the world and to the characters, and it's also taking some of that edge off the GM said my character was seasick, or the GM deliberately wrecked us in a storm, and now my character's drowned and is dead. Because you can, I suppose, remove the GM screen for a moment and let them see a process of decision making that no one can really argue with, because when you ask a player to roll a skill check and they roll a 3 and they fail that skill check, you didn't roll the dice and make it land on a 3. That's just how it went. The dice decided. So it gives you as a GM a little bit more neutrality room. And this is especially important if you have a hostile group. Not every group is lucky to have a fairly kind of chilled and calm dynamic. There are competitive groups with competitive GMs and competitive players out there in the world. And if you are a GM who has a bit of a feisty group who want to kind of challenge any negative decisions you take in the world, this could be a good way of you taking some of that heat off of you and pushing it back onto the players and going, hey, no, wait, I didn't make that decision. You rolled the dice and the dice, came up bad, and that's the decision and that's the direction we're all now taking in this story, and we've got to work it out together. And it's also quite good from a creative perspective, because you as the GM aren't sat in a position of, I know exactly where my story's going and I'm just going to kind of plod on. You are then in a position where every so often you'll throw yourself a curveball and the party will have a curveball thrown in, and you'll all have to kind of go, oh, what am I going to do with this? How is this going to work? What direction is this going to move things in? And like I said, you don't have to do this all the time, but for throwaway little things, for even big important things, it's quite fun to add a little bit of chaos with a dice roll to essentially arbitrate for you decisions. Now, you shouldn't do this for things like life or death. Although, in fairness, if you were in a situation where the narrative of the story really kind of heavily, weighed in favour of a downed party member being killed by the person that had killed them, or downed them, if you like, and put them unconscious, and you really didn't want to, as the GM, go, they definitely kill you, don't be too afraid if you're happy for that to be a possibility and be in the mix, but you don't necessarily want it to be a gimme. Palm it off on the player, or do an open roll in front of everyone at the table. Again, Pathfinder 2 talks about hidden rolls, where you can say, essentially the GM makes a knowledge check is a good example of this. You can quite happily roll like a law check or a society check or something along those lines behind the screen for the player, ask for what they're adding to said roll, total it up in secret, and then give them information based on the quote-unquote secret roll that they don't know if it's good or bad. That isn't wildly popular, and if I'm honest with you, I very rarely use it. If I do use it, it's in complete secret, and I don't even tell them that I've made a secret roll. That's how secret my secret rolls are. Yeah, very secret. Just because it's people like rolling dice. I'm a player, and I like rolling dice. So if loads of my checks were taken away from me and being made by the GM, it's not quite the same game. So, not to be too mean on that mechanic, it's a perfectly valid mechanic, but I think used very sparingly. Whereas with an open roll, a good example of a good way to use an open roll, if you really want to add a bit of drama and tension, is rolling in front of the party for a really important attack. So maybe there's a player who's on like 7 hit points and everyone's really panicky, and they're inevitably going to be attacked, and it's going round the table and it's getting to that point where they're the one that's going to get walloped because the monster has multiple attacks and has no reason to suddenly stop attacking them for the purpose of narrative. And you really want to kind of amp things up, but you also don't want an element of, oh, he just killed my character for the sake of it, and or also, oh, he just missed my character for the sake of it. So if you're comfortable living with the actual result of the dice roll it in front of the party so that everyone can see what you rolled for that attack. And then no one can hold that kind of positive or negative of, oh, the GM just fudged it to protect me, or the GM just fudged it to kill my character. It gives you these options, if you like, for revealing a little bit of the kind of the mystery behind the screen every so often. And like I said, especially if you've got a lot of tension and a lot of kind of pressure at the table, because people are competitive, generally in general, that is quite a good way of kind of giving that neutrality, because the dice are often the deciding factor in most things. Most big events that take place at a table in a role-playing game involve the rolling of dice. You know, attacks, critical hits, saving throws, skill checks. All the big kind of dynamic things that take place during a game are arbitrated by dice rolls. So adding dice rolls to other facets of your, if you like, toolbox as a GM, and also as a player, like if as a player you really want to see the GM's attack roll against you because you've got 5 hit points left, and as a player you're happy for your character to die on a legitimate roll, don't be afraid to say, could you roll it in front of all of us so we can all see it? Because they don't have to, you know, as a GM, you're not obligated to show them the character sheet or the stat boxes of the monster. They just need to see the dice roll. So if it lands on a 17, there's not going to be any quibbling about whether it hit or not, because the chances are, if it's a 17, you're probably adding something to that. It's probably hit, hasn't it? Do you know what I mean? So looking at the ways of which you can kind of just slightly change up your dice mechanics in what is already a fairly regimented kind of framework can really add a cool little dynamic to your table. So don't be afraid to use the occasional open roll. Don't be afraid to arbitrate little decisions, big decisions, dramatic moments to a dice roll. It'll catch you out, you'll think on your feet, you'll kind of suddenly find a new arc, a new kind of sudden direction the story might be taking. It refreshes your view on your story as a GM. And as players, those little moments where the GM hands off some pressure onto a player that might have some kind of impact on the party, like what's the weather like for this journey? Is it good? Is it bad? And then if it's bad and they're then having to make survival checks or whatever, and someone else at the table made that roll, there's that little bit of moment of kind of, you know, brevity where everyone's just like, oh, thanks a lot, Stephen. But you've got that little bit of banter and that little bit of kind of dynamic. But importantly, the story's taking a direction and added some, just a little extra depth, which is never a bad thing. So have a ponder on it. If you're a GM, try those little tools out and see what they do for you. Hopefully, like I said, especially if you've got a slightly kind of competitive environment, it'll take some of that pressure off you, because you then get to literally be like, hey, it's not my fault. You saw the dice roll. You know, sorry, the dice gods have decided. It's not my fault. Send them a letter. Give it a whirl. Let me know how you get on. And if you get a good moment kind of filtering in, even if it's like, you know, like a player death or like some event that suddenly kind of really curveball your story and you're suddenly running off in a different direction and you're like, oh, wow, this only happened because of Phil's wacky idea of kind of chaos theory dice rolling, let me know in the comments because I'd love to hear them. Like, subscribe, stay focused, stay on board, stay safe, stay well, and keep gaming. And I will see you on the next video. Peace.